This is the story of a 6-year-old boy who dies for 4 minutes during surgery and comes back with a message so shocking it shakes his grieving mother to her core. It is a message that reveals a horrifying truth about life, loss, and the unseen threads connecting us all. What could a child possibly see beyond death that would change everything? And why does his story leave everyone who hears it questioning their own place in the world?
Boulder, Colorado was not just a place on the map for the Anderson family. It was their little corner of paradise. Sitting right at the edge of the Rocky Mountains, the town had a charm that was hard to put into words. The air always felt cleaner there, with the scent of pine trees and wildflowers drifting in from the hills. Mornings came with golden sunrises that lit up the peaks, and evenings brought a calm stillness that made you want to sit outside and soak it all in. It was the kind of place where even strangers smiled at each other on the street, where everyone seemed to appreciate the simple joys of life. For the Andersons, Boulder was more than just where they lived. It was where they truly felt alive. Their home, a cozy little house with a red front door, was tucked into a quiet neighborhood filled with kids riding bikes and dogs chasing after balls. It was not flashy or big, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Between Emily's love for gardening, Daniel's weekend hikes in the mountains, and Liam's endless energy for exploring, Boulder gave them everything they could ever need. Life there felt easy, almost like a warm hug that you never wanted to let go of. For the Andersons, every day in Boulder was another chapter in their story, one they thought would last forever. The family of 3 lived in a cozy 2-story home on a quiet street lined with towering maple trees. Their backyard was Liam's personal kingdom. He'd spend hours building forts out of sticks or pretending his toy plane was on daring rescue missions. At just 6 years old, Liam had the kind of wild imagination that made you wonder if he'd grow up to be an inventor or a storyteller. "Mom, if I fly my plane fast enough, will it make rainbows?" he once asked. Emily, his mom, had laughed. "If anyone's plane can do that, Liam, it's yours." Emily was the heart of their home, a school teacher with endless patience and a talent for turning even the most mundane tasks into something fun. She kept the family running smoothly. She was the kind of mom who didn't just make cookies but let Liam play chef too, even if it meant flour covering every inch of the kitchen. Daniel, her husband, was the steady hand in their family. As a seasoned software engineer, his days were filled with intricate coding, debugging, and solving complex problems. Yet, no matter how demanding his work was, he had an unwavering rule. Family time was sacred. The moment he walked through the door, his focus shifted entirely to his wife and son, leaving work stresses at the doorstep. He had a remarkable ability to compartmentalize, ensuring his loved ones always had his full attention. His presence brought calm stability to their home, and his even-tempered nature made him the anchor during hectic or challenging moments. Every evening, without fail, Daniel became Liam's partner in crime. Whether they were wrestling on the living room floor, piecing together intricate model planes, or concocting wild adventures with toy soldiers, he immersed himself in the magic of Liam's world. He was more than just a dad who answered questions. He was one who turned every why into an opportunity for discovery. Sometimes he'd deliberately feign ignorance, just to see Liam's wheels turn as he worked out solutions on his own. These moments weren't just playtime. They were life lessons in patience, curiosity, and problem-solving, all wrapped in the warmth of a father's love. This trip to San Francisco had been on their minds for months, a plan whispered about during quiet evenings and jotted down on sticky notes pinned to the fridge. Emily's parents, Nana and Pops, hadn't seen them since Liam's 5th birthday, a milestone now etched in the rearview mirror of time. And the guilt of the passing years weighed heavily on her. Emily was determined to bridge the gap this year, no matter how busy life became. "I can already hear Nana saying we've waited too long," she joked to Daniel one night, her fingers skimming across the laptop keyboard as she browsed flights online. The thought of Nana's playful scolding was enough to nudge her into action. For Daniel, the trip was more than just a reunion. It was a chance to pause the relentless march of daily routines and let their family soak in new memories. He could already picture Pops hoisting Liam onto his shoulders for a tour of the Golden Gate Bridge, while Nana fussed over Emily, insisting she eat more of her famous apple pie. The anticipation buzzed through their home, weaving itself into conversations about what to pack, which sights to see, and how Liam would marvel at the cable cars. It was not just a getaway, but a homecoming, a chance to reconnect and share laughter that only family could bring. And so, with their tickets booked, the Andersons started counting down the days. Liam could barely contain his excitement. Every night before bed, he'd clutch his toy plane and ask questions about their trip. "Do you think Nana has cookies ready, Mom? What about brownies? And Pops, does he still have the trains?" Emily chuckled every time. "I think Nana and Pops have been preparing for you since the moment we told them." The day of the trip finally arrived, and their house buzzed with energy. Emily triple-checked the luggage. Daniel wrangled Liam into his sneakers. "Buddy, I know you're excited, but let's try not to pack half the toy box in your carry-on," he teased, pulling a second plane out of Liam's backpack. Liam protested, "But what if my first plane gets lonely?" Their drive to Denver International Airport was smooth, with Liam bouncing in the back seat, pointing out every passing plane in the sky. "Is that the one we're taking, Dad? Or maybe that one?" Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror, amused. "Ours is waiting for us, bud. Be patient." At the airport, the buzz of activity had Liam wide-eyed. It was his first time at such a big place, and everything amazed him. The people rushing with suitcases, the shiny conveyor belts carrying bags, and the planes taxiing outside the giant glass windows. "Mom, this is like a city of planes," he exclaimed. Emily and Daniel smiled at each other. Moments like these reminded them of the joy of seeing the world through Liam's eyes. They made their way through security without much fuss, though Liam couldn't resist asking the TSA officer if he could scan his plane toy too, just to be sure. The officer, to his credit, played along, waving the plane through the scanner like it was precious cargo. When they reached their gate, Liam was practically vibrating with excitement. He pressed his face to the window, watching planes take off and land. "Look at that one, Dad. It's so big. Is ours that big too?" Daniel sat beside him and pointed. "That one's a jumbo jet. Ours is a little smaller, but trust me, it'll still feel like we're flying through the clouds." Emily took the chance to call her mom, while Daniel entertained Liam. "We're here, Mom, at the gate." "Liam's already planning his in-flight snack strategy," she joked. "Yes, I packed his favorite crackers, don't worry." She glanced at Daniel, who was now mimicking a pilot's voice to explain how wings worked, and smiled. Soon, the boarding announcement crackled over the intercom. "Flight 607 to San Francisco is now boarding." Liam jumped up, clutching his toy plane like it was his passport. "That's us! That's us!" he shouted. Emily and Daniel gathered their bags and joined the line, with Liam bouncing between them like a pinball. As they walked down the jet bridge, Liam asked his mom, "Do you think we'll fly over the mountains?" Emily nodded. "Definitely, sweetie. And if you look out the window, you might even see the clouds up close." That answer seemed to delight him. Inside the plane, they settled into their seats. Liam pressed his nose to the window, marveling at the view even before takeoff. Emily handed him a small bag of gummy bears to keep him occupied, though he barely noticed them. Daniel leaned over and whispered, "Do you think he'll actually sit still?" Emily smirked. "Not a chance." The cabin was filled with the usual sounds of passengers settling in, overhead bins clicking shut, and the flight attendants giving safety instructions. Liam listened with wide eyes, tugging on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, are we really going to fly through the sky like birds?" Daniel smiled. "Even better, buddy. We'll fly higher than any bird ever could." It was one of those rare moments where everything felt right. The kind of moment you don't realize is perfect until it's gone. Liam full of excitement and wonder. Emily and Daniel shared quiet smiles as they watched their son. The anticipation of reuniting with family. They were all ready for an adventure. But life often has a way of changing plans in the blink of an eye. What happens when a journey filled with joy and love takes a turn no one could have predicted? Flight to disaster. It started out like any other flight. United Airlines Flight 607, bound for San Francisco from Denver, cruised smoothly over the Sierra Nevada mountains, the sky clear, and the passengers settled in for the long haul. The engines hummed in a comforting rhythm, and the flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering snacks and drinks. The Andersons, cozy in their seats, were still buzzing with the excitement of their trip. Liam was wide-eyed, his head pressed against the window as he traced the shapes of clouds with his finger. Emily smiled at him from the aisle, Daniel chuckling as Liam declared, "Look, Mom, that one's a dragon." But as the hours passed, something shifted. It started with a loud, sharp noise, an explosion of sound that seemed to come out of nowhere. The plane jerked violently, throwing passengers out of their seats. The overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage and items across the cabin. People screamed in panic, their voices high with fear and confusion. The sound of metal groaning and engine sputtering filled the air. For a moment, everything seemed like a blur. Chaos wrapped in a heavy fog of noise and terror. The cockpit responded immediately. A muffled voice crackled over the intercom, trying to reassure the passengers. "This is your captain speaking," the voice said, unsteady and strained. "Please remain calm. We are experiencing a mechanical issue, but we are working to resolve it." The words felt hollow, like they were meant to calm a storm, but they did nothing to ease the sinking feeling in the pit of everyone's stomach. As the plane began to dip, Emily gripped the armrests, her heart pounding in her chest. Liam's voice broke through the panic. "Mom, what's happening? I'm scared." His small hand reached for hers, and she squeezed it tightly, not knowing what to say. She forced a smile, trying to mask the terror in her own heart. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." But deep down, Emily knew that it was not okay. The plane was losing altitude fast, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. A sudden, sharp lurch sent them all tumbling sideways, and then, just as quickly, the plane leveled out again. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the fastened seatbelt announcement came through again, but it was almost drowned out by the screams and the panic that had taken over the cabin. Outside the window, the sprawling mountain range was now much closer. The Sierra Nevada peaks seemed to rise like jagged teeth in the distance. Emily's thoughts flashed through her mind in a blur. This is it. We're going down. The sound of the engine sputtering grew louder, almost deafening. The terrifying roar of failing engines drowned out Liam's cries. Then, with a sickening thud, the plane lurched again, and Emily felt herself being pressed hard against her seatbelt. The world outside the window seemed to tilt, the mountains spinning in and out of view. She felt weightless for a split second, as though gravity had disappeared altogether, and then, in an instant, everything shattered. The plane crashed hard into the ground. The world exploded into fire and noise. The fuselage crumpled like paper, metal tearing and snapping as the impact sent shockwaves through the cabin. Screams filled the air, but it was impossible to tell where they were coming from, or if they even mattered anymore. Smoke and debris filled the air, stinging Emily's eyes. The acrid smell of burning fuel mixing with the sharp tang of blood. The lights flickered and died. Emily was thrown forward. The seatbelt dug painfully into her chest as everything around her spun into darkness. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of her own pulse thundering in her ears. Then, everything went still. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the thick, acrid smoke that hung in the air. The plane's wreckage surrounded her. Crumpled seats, torn metal, broken windows, and scattered debris. The sounds of the outside world seemed muffled, almost as if they came from a far-off place. She took a breath, trying to steady herself, but the air tasted burnt and sharp. She pushed against the seat in front of her, using every ounce of strength she had to unbuckle herself. Her heart was racing, and her mind was clouded with fear. Liam, Daniel, The names floated through her mind like a prayer. She had to find them. "Liam?" she called out, her voice hoarse and shaking. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she staggered to her feet. The world around her seemed to spin and the pain in her head was unbearable, but she forced herself to move. The wreckage was everywhere. Twisted metal and shattered glass lay scattered across the forest floor, surrounded by dense trees and uneven ground. She pushed her way through the wreckage, not caring about the sharp shards beneath her feet, the blood dripping down her leg, or the cuts on her arms. All that mattered was finding Liam. "Liam!" she called again, her voice cracking. She stumbled through the wreckage, her heart hammering in her chest. Her thoughts raced. He has to be here. Please, God, let him be here. And then she saw him. Liam was lying motionless on the ground a few feet away from her. His small body was bent awkwardly, his clothes torn, and his face was covered in blood. She collapsed beside him, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch his cold skin. "Liam," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Please, Liam, wake up." His breath was shallow, but there was something there. A faint pulse, a flicker of life. Emily gathered him in her arms, cradling him gently, even though her own body screamed in pain. She could feel his weight in her arms. It was so light and fragile. "He's alive. He's alive. Don't let him go." But as she held him, a horrible realization swept over her. She turned her head, desperately searching for Daniel. He had been sitting beside her right next to Liam. He had to be here. Her eyes scanned the wreckage, but then she saw it. Daniel. He was lying motionless, several feet away, his body bent at an unnatural angle. There was no movement, no sign of life. "Daniel! Daniel!" Emily screamed, her voice raw with grief. She rushed to him, dropping to her knees beside him. But as she reached for him, the truth hit her like a hammer. He was gone. Her heart shattered. She cradled his lifeless body in her arms, her tears falling freely now. Daniel, my love, my protector, gone. How could this be real? How could the man she loved, the father of her child, be gone in an instant? The world around her seemed to spin, and the pain in her chest was unbearable. But then she looked down at Liam, his tiny, fragile body in her arms. He was still alive. How could she save him now? Would she be strong enough to face whatever came next? What happens when you lose everything in an instant, and yet you still have to find a way to survive? The crash that shattered lives. Amidst the wreckage of the plane crash, an emergency locator transmitter did exactly what it was designed to do. The signal, like a lifeline sent into the ether, was picked up by nearby air traffic controllers. Within minutes, the alert was forwarded to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, and local search and rescue teams. Somewhere in the chaos of twisted metal and scorched earth, hope flickered. Help was on the way. From the sky, the crash site looked surreal. A torn plane scattered across the dense El Dorado National Forest, a place known for its towering pines and rugged terrain. The emergency response was swift. Rescuers from California Task Force 4, an elite urban search and rescue team, mobilized immediately. Their helicopters, carrying paramedics from Reach Air Medical Services, roared overhead like guardian angels descending from the heavens. When the rescue teams arrived, they were met with a scene that would shake even the most seasoned professionals. Smoke still billowed from the remnants of the aircraft, and the air was thick with the smell of burning fuel and shattered lives. The ground was littered with debris. Suitcases, plane seats, and fragments of metal twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Survivors' cries for help echoed through the forest, their voices mingling with the chirping of birds oblivious to the tragedy. Emily lay amidst the chaos, her broken ribs sending sharp waves of pain through her body. Her arms were wrapped protectively around Liam, who remained unconscious, his face pale and smeared with blood. She had no idea how long she'd been lying there. Time had blurred into an endless moment of terror and desperation. "Please," she whispered hoarsely to no one in particular. "Please, find us." A paramedic from Reach Air Medical Services spotted her. "Over here," he called to his team, his voice firm but urgent. The sight of the mother and child clinging to each other amidst the debris struck a chord with everyone on the scene. The paramedics worked quickly, assessing their injuries with practiced precision. Liam's condition was critical. A severe head injury had left him unresponsive, his tiny body limp in his mother's arms. "We need to airlift them immediately," one paramedic said. The team nodded, moving with the kind of efficiency that only comes from experience. They secured Liam on a stretcher, stabilizing his fragile body before lifting him into the helicopter. Emily, despite her own injuries, refused to let go of him until the last possible moment. "Stay with him," she pleaded to the paramedics, her voice cracking with emotion. The ride to the UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento was both agonizingly long and terrifyingly short. Emily, strapped into the helicopter beside Liam, alternated between watching his still face and clutching the seatbelt across her chest. The rhythmic hum of the helicopter blades was a cruel reminder of how fragile life could be. When they landed at the medical center, a team of doctors and nurses was already waiting. Dr. Angela Matthews, a trauma specialist with years of experience, took charge immediately. "Let's move!" she barked, her calm demeanor masking the urgency of the situation. Liam was whisked away to the operating room, leaving Emily alone in the sterile brightness of the hospital hallway. It was only then, as she sat slumped in a chair, that the weight of everything crashed down on her. Her ribs throbbed, her arms ached, and every breath felt like a battle. But none of it mattered. All she could think about was Liam. Would he survive this? A nurse approached her gently. "Mrs. Anderson," she began, her tone careful, "I have to inform you, your husband..." Emily's heart sank. She didn't need the nurse to finish the sentence. She had known deep down, ever since she had seen Daniel's lifeless body at the crash site. But hearing it spoken aloud shattered something inside her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as if denying it would change the truth. "No, no, no." Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "We're here for you." Grief came in waves, crashing over Emily like a relentless tide. Daniel, the man who had been her rock, her partner, her love, was gone. She couldn't process it, couldn't believe that just hours ago, they had been laughing with Liam about Nana's cookies and planning their weekend in San Francisco. But as much as she wanted to collapse under the weight of her pain, she couldn't. Not yet. Liam was still in surgery, and he needed her to be strong. She wiped her tears, took a shaky breath, and whispered, "For Liam. I have to do this for Liam." The hours dragged on. The hospital lights were too bright, the waiting room too cold, and the silence too loud. Emily felt like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She replayed the crash in her mind over and over, the sound of the engines failing, the terror in Liam's voice, and the moment of impact. Finally, Dr. Matthews appeared. Her face was tired but composed. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, sitting down beside Emily, "Liam is stable for now. The surgery went as well as we could have hoped." Emily let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "He's going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Matthews hesitated. "It's too soon to tell," she admitted. "The head injury was severe, and we'll need to monitor him closely. But he's a fighter. That much is clear." Emily clung to those words like a lifeline. A fighter. Liam was a fighter. He had to be. As the day turned into night, Emily finally got to see Liam. He lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. His head was wrapped in bandages, and his small body seemed even smaller under the weight of wires and tubes. But he was alive. Emily sat beside him, holding his tiny hand in hers. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. The loss of Daniel hung heavy in the air, but Emily forced herself to focus on the present. Liam needed her now more than ever. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She would fight for her son with every ounce of strength she had left. But what happens when survival is only the beginning? How do you rebuild when the pieces of your life feel too broken to put back together? Survival from the wreckage. The bustling hallways of UC Davis Medical Center seemed quieter as Liam was wheeled into the operating room. His small body, hooked up to a maze of tubes and machines, barely moved. Nurses and doctors flanked the stretcher, their faces a mix of focus and urgency. Emily's desperate whispers, "Please, save him," echoed in the minds of the medical team. They knew the stakes. Every second counted. Dr. Michael Tanaka, the hospital's leading pediatric neurosurgeon, stood at the ready. His reputation was as sharp as the instruments he wielded. A man who had saved countless lives, though he never made promises he couldn't keep. "Let's move quickly," he ordered, as they transferred Liam to the operating table. His calm yet commanding voice filled the sterile room like a lighthouse cutting through a storm. Liam's injuries were severe. The impact from the crash had caused a traumatic brain injury, and swelling was already threatening to overwhelm the fragile balance of his young body. Dr. Tanaka studied the scans, but his face was unreadable. "We're dealing with a subdural hematoma," he explained to the team. "We need to relieve the pressure immediately, or he won't make it." The room sprang into action. Instruments clinked against metal trays. Monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm a lifeline tethering Liam to the world. The air was thick with focus as the team worked together seamlessly, like musicians in a high-stakes orchestra. Meanwhile, outside the operating room, Emily sat in a daze. She clutched a blanket one of the nurses had given her, its scratchy texture grounding her in the chaos. Every minute felt like an eternity. Her thoughts raced. What if I lose him too? She bit her lip, hard enough to taste blood, trying to keep herself from spiraling. Inside the operating room, the situation grew more critical. As Dr. Tanaka carefully navigated Liam's fragile brain, an alarm sounded, a piercing shrill note that froze the entire room. "Flatline," a nurse called out. The words hit like a thunderclap. Liam's heart had stopped. Dr. Tanaka didn't hesitate. "Begin compressions," he commanded. A nurse moved to the head of the table, while another injected epinephrine. The room buzzed with controlled chaos, the team moving like clockwork to bring Liam back. "Come on, kid," Dr. Tanaka muttered under his breath, his hands steady but his mind racing. He had seen this before. Cardiac arrest during surgery was a surgeon's nightmare, especially in cases like Liam's, where every second without oxygen could mean irreversible brain damage. Or worse. 4 minutes passed, though it felt like a lifetime to everyone in the room. The monitor stubbornly refused to change. The flatline's piercing sound filled the room as if mocking their efforts. Still, no one gave up. "Push another dose," Dr. Tanaka ordered. His jaw was tight, his movements precise. "Charge the defibrillator." The paddles were brought in, their metallic surface gleaming under the harsh operating lights. A nurse called out, "Clear," and a jolt of electricity surged through Liam's tiny body. Once, twice. The flatline persisted. A third jolt. The room held its collective breath. Then, a flicker, a heartbeat, faint but steady. "He's back," the nurse announced, relief breaking through her professional tone. The team exhaled as one, but there was no time to celebrate. Liam's battle was far from over. Dr. Tanaka wiped his brow, his expression unreadable. "Let's continue. We've bought some time, but we're not out of the woods yet." Emily felt the shift outside even before a nurse came out to update her. It was not intuition or any kind of magical connection, just sheer hope refusing to die. The nurse's words were clinical, but carried a glimmer of reassurance. "He's stable for now," she said, "but it's touch and go." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to respond. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. She didn't care who was listening, or if they worked. Liam was alive. That was all that mattered. Back in the operating room, the team worked tirelessly. The swelling in Liam's brain had begun to subside, thanks to Dr. Tanaka's delicate work. The room's atmosphere, tense just moments before, began to shift. The monitors beeped steadily now, the once panicked alarms replaced by a calm, rhythmic pulse. "Looks good," Dr. Tanaka finally said, stepping back to let the nurses close the incision. His voice carried the weight of relief. "Let's get him to recovery." Liam's tiny body looked almost lost amidst the wires and machines as they wheeled him out of surgery. Dr. Tanaka followed, pulling off his gloves and tossing them into the waste bin. He wiped his hands and face with a towel before heading toward Emily. She spotted him immediately and stood, her legs shaky but determined. "Doctor," she began, her voice cracking. "How is he?" Dr. Tanaka's face softened. "He made it through," he said, his tone steady but kind. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped, but the next 48 hours are critical. We'll be monitoring him closely for any signs of complications." Emily nodded, her tears falling freely now. She didn't care about complications or tubes or machines. Her son was alive. That was enough. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As Liam was moved to the intensive care unit, Emily was allowed to see him. The sight of him, so small and fragile under the weight of medical equipment, broke her heart. But she focused on the steady beep of the monitor beside him. It was a reminder that he was still here, still fighting. She sat beside him, holding his tiny hand in hers. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." In the quiet hum of the hospital room, the enormity of what had happened began to settle in. Liam had been gone for 4 long minutes. His heart had stopped, his life hanging in the balance. Yet here he was, defying the odds. But what had he experienced in those minutes? Where had his little soul gone? And what would he remember? And more importantly, how would this journey shape the road ahead? The boy who defied death. Liam didn't remember the crash, the ambulance ride, or even the hospital. He was in chaos one moment, and everything went still the next. No noise, no pain, just a strange, weightless calm. It wasn't scary, it was almost nice, like floating on a soft cloud. Except there wasn't any cloud. For Liam, everything changed in an instant. One moment, he was lying on an operating table, surrounded by beeping machines and voices he couldn't understand. The next, he felt like he was floating. He was not just floating in water or air, but weightless in a way he had never felt before. There was no pain, no heaviness, just a strange, calm detachment. He looked around and realized he was not where he thought he'd be, or how he thought he'd be. Below him, he saw a group of adults in blue scrubs moving with intense focus. He recognized the room as the one they'd wheeled him into earlier, but the perspective was different. He was looking down at it as though he'd climbed up to the ceiling. Only, he hadn't climbed. He was just there. At first, it was confusing. Liam squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There, on the table, was a boy. He was small, pale, with messy blonde hair, and hooked up to all kinds of machines. "That's me," he thought, but the realization didn't scare him. It was more of a curious observation, like seeing himself in a mirror that didn't belong to him. The adults in the room were busy. A tall man with glasses barked instructions. A nurse rushed to adjust something on the machine. Another held shiny paddles, which Liam vaguely recognized from a TV show. He floated a little closer, drawn in by the urgency of their movements. He could see everything, not just the people, but the details. The sweat on the doctor's forehead, the way the nurse's hands trembled slightly as she worked. Liam wasn't scared for them or himself. If anything, he felt a strange kind of calm, like he was watching a puzzle being solved, knowing it would all work out somehow. The room felt full of energy, buzzing like a hive of bees. He could hear the machines beeping, the hum of conversation, and even the faint squeak of someone's shoes against the floor. Yet, none of it felt overwhelming. It was like the sounds and sights blended together into something almost musical, soothing in its rhythm. And then, something shifted. Liam felt a tug, not on his body. His body was still lying there on the table, but on whatever part of him was floating. It wasn't a hand pulling him, but a gentle but firm sensation, like a breeze carrying him somewhere. He resisted at first, not out of fear, but curiosity. He wanted to see what the tall man with the glasses was going to do next. The tug grew stronger. Slowly, the room below him started to blur. The sounds softened like someone was turning down the volume on a radio. Liam felt himself being drawn away, upward, though he didn't know where he was going. And then he saw it. A tunnel. It differed from the tunnels his dad used to drive through in the mountains. This one felt unique. It wasn't crafted from stone or concrete, but made entirely of light. The soft golden glow seemed to shimmer and move, like sunlight dancing on water. The light didn't just appear to be seen. It reached out to be felt. It wrapped around Liam like a warm blanket on a cold day. More than warm, it radiated a sense of welcome. Comforting and kind, it felt like a hug from someone you deeply love. As he moved into the tunnel, he noticed how quiet everything had become. Not an empty kind of quiet, but a peaceful one. The kind of quiet that makes you feel safe, like nothing bad could ever happen. The light grew brighter the deeper he went, but it wasn't harsh. It didn't hurt his eyes or make him squint. It just was glowing and alive. Liam couldn't see where the tunnel ended, but he didn't care. He was not worried about where he was going. He just felt like he was meant to be here. The further he went, the lighter he felt. All the weight he didn't even know he was carrying, the pain from the crash, the fear, even the worry about his mom, seemed to melt away. There was only peace now, a deep, unshakable peace that filled every part of him. For a moment, Liam wondered if this was forever. He was not sure how he felt about that. He liked the tunnel, the light, the peace. But somewhere in his mind, there was a flicker of something else. A question. Where is Mom? The question softened as the light surrounded him, like it didn't matter anymore. Liam felt himself smile, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was the light. Or maybe it was the way everything here seemed perfect, complete. And yet, as much as he loved the peace, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, what was waiting for him at the end of the tunnel? And why did it feel so familiar, like he'd been there before? A glimpse of heaven. Liam stepped out of the tunnel of golden light and into a place that felt both strange and familiar. He blinked, though there was no sun to shield his eyes from. Everything around him glowed softly, as if the air itself carried a warm, golden hue. The ground beneath him was unlikely the grass he knew back home. It was softer, greener, and seemed to shimmer slightly as though it was alive. A meadow stretched out before him, endless and serene. It felt neither empty nor cluttered, striking a perfect balance. Flowers dotted the landscape, their colors so vibrant they almost hummed. There were no walls, no buildings, just an open expanse that seemed to go on forever. Yet, it didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. Liam didn't know how long he stood there. Time didn't seem to exist in this place. He looked down at himself, half expecting to see his jeans and favorite blue shirt, but there was nobody to look at. It did not scare him. If anything, he felt more himself than he ever had before. And then he noticed the figure. It stood not far away, unmoving in the middle of the meadow. The figure didn't walk toward Liam, but the space between them somehow closed. Closer now, Liam could see the figure differed from anyone he'd met before. It didn't resemble a person, at least not how he thought of people. It glowed brighter than anything else in the meadow, but the light wasn't harsh. It had a softness, warmth, and welcoming quality, like the first rays of morning sunlight. Liam didn't need anyone to tell him who this was. He just knew. "Are you Jesus?" he asked, his voice steady, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking out loud. The figure didn't answer with words. Instead, Liam felt an overwhelming sense of love so deep, it brought tears to his eyes. If he even had eyes here. It wasn't just love for him. It was love for everything. It filled him from the inside out, like a warm fire that never burned. And though the figure didn't speak, Liam understood the answer. Yes. Liam wasn't sure what to do. Should he bow, kneel, say something else? But the figure's presence seemed to say, "Just be here." So Liam stood there, letting the warmth and peace wash over him. And then, without moving a hand, or even having one, the figure showed him something. The meadow around them shifted, not disappearing, but blending into something else. Before Liam, a tapestry appeared, stretching farther than he could see. It was not like the quilts his mom made at home. It was alive. Threads of light wove in and out of each other, glowing with colors Liam didn't even know existed. "What is it?" Liam whispered, awestruck. The answer came not in words, but in feeling. It was life. All life. Every thread represented someone somewhere. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, and every loss was woven together into this massive, breathtaking piece of art. Liam stepped closer, drawn to the tapestry. As he watched, the threads moved. Some crossed paths, others branched off, but none of them ended. Even when a thread seemed to stop, it simply wove itself into another, connecting in ways Liam couldn't fully understand. And then his eyes caught something familiar, a thread glowing softly, twined with two others. Liam leaned in, though he didn't have to, and felt his heart swell. It was his dad's thread. He knew it instantly, not because of how it looked, but because of how it felt, strong, steady, full of love. It intertwined with another thread, warm and nurturing. That was his mom's. And next to it, smaller but just as vibrant, was his own. "They're connected," Liam said, the realization sinking in. His dad's thread hadn't disappeared after the crash. It was still there, woven tightly with his and his mom's. Even though his dad was gone, he wasn't really gone. He was part of something bigger, something eternal. Liam felt tears again, but they weren't sad ones. He didn't feel the ache of loss for the first time since the crash. Instead, he felt whole, like a missing piece of a puzzle had been found and placed exactly where it belonged. The figure radiated warmth, as though encouraging Liam to take it all in. He stared at the tapestry, watching the threads dance and shimmer. Some were bright and bold, others softer and quieter, but each one was important. Every thread mattered, even the ones that seemed small or dim. "Why is it so beautiful?" Liam asked, not really expecting an answer. And yet, the answer came, not in words, but in understanding. The beauty came from the connections, the way each thread touched another, and every moment, good or bad, wove together to create something bigger than any single thread could be on its own. Liam felt the truth of it deep in his heart. The crash, the pain, even his dad's death, they were part of the tapestry. They weren't random or meaningless. They were threads that connected him to something greater, something eternal. He turned to the figure, his small voice filled with awe. "Does everyone have a thread?" The figure's light seemed to glow even brighter, and Liam felt the answer in his soul. Yes, Liam stood there for what felt like forever, watching the tapestry, feeling its warmth, understanding its meaning. He wanted to stay, to keep learning, to see more. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered, "It's time to go back." The figure's light shifted, becoming softer, like the dimming of a lantern. The tapestry faded, though its memory stayed in Liam's heart. He didn't want to leave. Not yet, but he understood. His thread wasn't finished. Liam looked back at the figure one last time. "Will I remember this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't speak, but Liam felt the answer. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know he was never alone. Enough to know his dad was always with him. And then, the meadow blurred. The warmth faded, replaced by a cold, heavy sensation. The golden light dimmed, and the beeping of machines filled his ears again. Liam opened his eyes, the sterile brightness of the hospital room coming into focus. He was back. But how would this experience shape his life? And what would he do with the knowledge he carried from that meadow of light? A divine revelation. Liam stood in the meadow, still surrounded by the golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. He could still feel the figure's presence, warm and steady, though the tapestry he had just seen began to fade. It was not gone. Its memory lingered in his heart, heavy with meaning. But now, something else was happening. The air around him seemed to shimmer as though the light itself wanted to show him something new. Images began to form, not like pictures on a screen, but more like memories playing in his mind. They came in flashes, each one vibrant and alive, and Liam instinctively knew they were important. In the first vision, Liam saw a small town hit by a terrible storm. The streets were flooded, homes were destroyed, and people stood in the rain, looking lost and broken. But then something shifted. Neighbors came together, wading through the water to help one another. Strangers shared food, blankets, and smiles. People who had never spoken before were now working side by side, their hands busy and their hearts open. Liam felt something stir inside him as he watched. He realized that there was kindness even in the middle of so much pain. The storm had brought destruction, but it had also brought people closer. The vision changed. Now Liam saw a boy sitting alone in a school cafeteria, his head down and his tray untouched. His shoulders slumped, and the loneliness around him felt so heavy that Liam thought he might start crying just watching it. But then, another boy walked over and sat down beside him. He didn't say much, just handed him a cookie and smiled. The lonely boy looked up, and in that small act of kindness, Liam saw something beautiful. One by one, more visions came. Liam saw a woman donating her last bit of money to help a stranger. He saw firefighters rushing into a burning building, their faces determined and brave. He saw a community rebuilding a park for children after years of neglect. Each scene was different, but they all carried the same feeling, a connection between people born out of struggle, but filled with hope. Liam turned toward the figure, his mind racing with questions. "Why do these bad things have to happen?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "Why can't everything just be good?" The figure didn't answer in words. Instead, Liam felt an understanding bloom inside him, like a flower opening to the sun. He realized that the pain, the loss, the struggles, they weren't meaningless. They were part of something bigger. Without them, the acts of kindness, bravery, and love wouldn't shine as brightly. It was like the tapestry he had seen earlier. Every thread mattered, even the dark ones. They gave depth and contrast to the brighter threads, creating a picture so complex and beautiful that Liam couldn't look away. He understood now that life wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real. Liam's thoughts drifted to his own life. He thought about the crash, the fear he had felt, and the aching loss of his dad. It hurt to think about, but now he saw it in a different way. His dad's love hadn't disappeared. It had become part of something bigger, just like the threads in the tapestry. And even though the crash had been a tragedy, Liam felt that somehow something good could come from it. The figure radiated warmth, as if to say, "You're starting to understand." Liam felt a sense of peace he couldn't explain. It did not seem the kind of peace that made everything easy or perfect. It was the kind that made him feel strong enough to face the hard things, knowing they had a purpose. The visions continued, each one teaching him something new. He saw a family planting a tree in honor of a loved one they had lost. He saw children laughing as they painted murals over graffiti-covered walls. He saw a woman forgiving someone who had hurt her deeply, her tears mixing with a quiet smile. Liam realized that the struggles people faced didn't have to break them. They could build something new instead. The pain did not mean the end of the story. It was just one part of it. The figure's light grew brighter, filling the meadow with an almost tangible glow. Liam felt like he could reach out and hold it in his hands. And though he didn't hear words, he felt the message as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud. Love is what holds it all together. The simplicity of it made Liam's heart ache in the best way. It was more than complicated or grand. It was just love. Love in all its forms. From a hug to a helping hand to a cookie shared at lunch. That's what made the struggles bearable. That's what turned the loss into something meaningful. Liam took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the message settle in his chest. He didn't know what was waiting for him back in the world he had come from, but he knew he was not the same anymore. He felt stronger, wiser, and ready to carry this truth with him wherever he went. But one question lingered in his mind. "How can I help?" he asked the figure, his voice soft but sure. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The figure didn't respond with instructions or a plan. Instead, Liam felt the answer in his heart. It wasn't about doing something grand or heroic. It was about living with love, spreading kindness wherever he could, and trusting that even small actions could make a big difference. The meadow began to fade, the golden light dimming just slightly. Liam felt a tug again, pulling him back the way he had come. But this time, he didn't resist. He did not feel afraid. He knew he was ready. Liam thought about everything he had seen and learned as the visions dissolved into the light. He knew life wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it didn't have to be. Every thread, every struggle, every loss was part of something greater. And in that, there was beauty. But how would Liam take this newfound understanding into the world he was returning to? And how would he share this truth with others who might not yet see the tapestry? The purpose behind pain. Liam felt it before he saw anything, the tug gentle but firm, like a hand pulling him out of a warm, endless dream. He didn't want to leave. The light, the peace, the love. It was perfect. But the pull was not asking. It was insistent, drawing him back faster and faster through the tunnel of golden light. The warm glow began to fade, replaced by sharp, sterile brightness. Voices grew louder, rushing in like a flood. Machines beeped in quick, anxious rhythms. The calm hum of the heavenly realm gave way to the chaotic hum of the operating room. Liam's first thought was, "Why is it so loud here?" "Clear!" The voice of Dr. Michael Tanaka, sharp and focused, cut through the noise. A nurse called out the heart monitor readings, her voice steady but tense. The room was a storm of movement, everyone on edge. No one noticed the faint flicker in Liam's eyelids. And then, he gasped. It was small at first, just a hitch of breath, but it silenced the room. The beeping on the monitor changed, and a rhythmic pulse replaced the steady flat line. One of the nurses froze, her eyes widening. "He's back," she whispered. Dr. Tanaka leaned in, his eyes scanning Liam's face. "Liam, "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice calm but threaded with disbelief. Liam blinked, his vision blurry. The fluorescent lights above felt harsh after the warm glow of the meadow. His chest felt heavy, his head throbbed, but he was aware. Slowly, he turned his head, looking around the room, his small body still connected to countless wires and tubes. The surgical team stood frozen, their disbelief palpable. They had fought for Liam's life, and by all medical reasoning, he shouldn't have come back. Not without lasting damage, at least. Yet here he was, looking at them with clear, curious eyes. "I'm okay," Liam croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Tanaka raised an eyebrow, exchanging glances with the team. "Kid, you're more than okay," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head in amazement. Emily had been waiting just outside the operating room, pacing the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself. When a nurse came out and said, "He's awake," she didn't wait for permission. She ran. Inside the recovery room, she found Liam, small and fragile, in the hospital bed, but awake. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to his side, gently placing her hand on his. "Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking. Liam turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Dad's okay, Mom," he said, his voice soft but certain. "He's with the light." Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The words hit her like a wave, bringing a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite name. "How do you—" she began, but her voice faltered. She squeezed his hand, her tears falling freely now. Liam's words weren't the ramblings of a confused child. He spoke with a calm certainty, as though he had seen something no one else could understand. The nurses and doctors in the room exchanged glances. It wasn't the first time they'd heard stories of near-death experiences, but it never stopped being extraordinary. Still, the skepticism lingered. Could this just be the brain's response to trauma? Hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation? Dr. Tanaka cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Liam, can you tell us what you mean?" he asked gently, his professional curiosity piqued. Liam looked at him, his small face calm despite the tubes and bandages. "I saw him," he said simply. "And there was a light. It was warm and happy." "He's okay, Mom," he smiled at me. Emily's heart twisted. She didn't know whether to cry harder or smile at her son's words. The room remained silent, the weight of Liam's statement sinking into everyone present. The surgical team finished their work, quietly leaving the room to give Emily and Liam some privacy. Outside, the chatter started. 4 minutes, one of the nurses said, shaking her head. He was clinically dead for 4 minutes. How was he even awake, let alone talking? Dr. Tanaka leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "The body is unpredictable," he said thoughtfully, though his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by science alone. Back in the room, Emily sat beside Liam, her hand never leaving his. "What do you mean? He smiled at you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Liam thought for a moment, his little brow furrowed. "He was happy," he said, as if it was the simplest explanation in the world. "He said it's okay, and he loves us." Emily's tears flowed freely now, her heart aching with both loss and gratitude. "Oh, Liam," she whispered, leaning down to kiss his forehead. Liam drifted off to sleep not long after, his small body exhausted from the ordeal. Emily sat beside him, her thoughts a whirlwind. How could she reconcile what her son had said with the reality of losing Danielle? Was it possible that Liam had truly seen him? Or was it just the brain's way of coping with trauma? The doctors and nurses remained amazed by Liam's recovery. His vitals were strong, his brain showed no signs of damage, and he seemed to bounce back faster than they could have predicted. "It's nothing short of a miracle," one nurse said, shaking her head. But was it just a medical anomaly? Or had Liam truly glimpsed something beyond this world? And if he had, what would it mean for their lives going forward? Tapestry of love and loss. After leaving the hospital, life at home was quiet. The kind of quiet that weighed heavy on Emily's heart. The house, once filled with the sounds of Daniel's laughter and the rush of daily life, now felt like a space too big for just the two of them. Emily still couldn't quite wrap her mind around everything that had happened. The loss of Daniel, the trauma of what Liam had gone through, and the miraculous way he had come back. It was all too much. But as the days passed, something in Liam began to change. He started talking more, not just about his recovery, but about what he had seen during the time when he was, as he put it, gone. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting a soft golden light through the kitchen window, Emily sat at the table, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea. Liam sat across from her, watching her carefully, his young face filled with a quiet sort of wisdom. "Mom," he began, his voice a little uncertain at first. "I want to tell you more about what I saw." Emily set her cup down, focusing entirely on him, her heart fluttering in her chest. She had been waiting for this. Every time Liam spoke about his experience, it felt like a little more of Daniel was coming back to them. Liam didn't need to say much more before Emily's eyes softened, her heart ready to listen. He spoke slowly, as if he was carefully choosing each word. "I saw something like a giant, like a picture. But it wasn't just a picture. It was all these threads, weaving in and out. And they were alive, I think. They moved, like they were part of everything. Like the whole world was one big tapestry." Emily leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her hands wrapped around her teacup. She didn't interrupt. She had learned to just let him speak when he started to share these things. "The threads weren't just things, Mom," Liam continued, his voice steady now. "They were people, everyone, and Dad's thread was there too." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't let it stop her from listening. She could see the sincerity in Liam's eyes, the way he believed every word he was saying. It made her feel something deeper than just grief. It made her feel a strange kind of comfort, as if Daniel's spirit hadn't really left them after all. Liam paused, looking down at his hands for a moment before looking back up at her. "He's not really gone, Mom. He's still here. I know it. He told me it's okay." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Emily tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. They weren't tears of sadness this time. They were different, like a release, as if Liam's words had somehow unlocked a door that had been shut tight for so long. Liam, ever the sensitive boy, noticed her tears and reached across the table, his small hand resting gently on hers. "It's okay, Mom," he said quietly. "He's okay. He's watching over us. I can feel him, like he's right there, you know?" Emily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She could almost feel Daniel too, like a presence in the room, just out of sight, but always there. Liam's voice broke through her thoughts again. "I know it's hard, Mom, but Dad says we have to be strong. For him, for us. He says we're all part of this big picture. We just can't see it all yet." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It was very tough. How could it be? But hearing Liam talk like this, hearing him speak with such certainty, made her feel like maybe she wasn't alone in this grief. Maybe she could find a way to heal too. "You're right," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll be strong. For you. For Dad." Liam smiled at her, a small knowing smile that only a child could have, one that seemed far beyond his years. "I know you will, Mom. I know you will." For the rest of that evening, the conversation turned to quieter things, the rhythm of everyday life returning around them. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Liam's words, his calm confidence, had planted a seed of healing deep inside her. He was right, she realized. Daniel's love hadn't disappeared. It was still woven into the fabric of their lives. As the night wore on, Emily tucked Liam into bed, brushing his hair from his forehead with a gentle hand. He looked up at her, his eyes soft with sleep. "Good night, Mom," he said, his voice drifting into a whisper. "Don't forget, Dad's still with us. I know it." "I won't forget, Liam," Emily whispered back, kissing him gently on the forehead. "I won't forget." She stood there for a moment, watching him drift off to sleep, his face peaceful, the weight of the world somehow a little lighter. She didn't know what the future held, or how the pain of losing Daniel would ever fully go away. But she knew one thing. Liam was right. Daniel's love was still part of them, woven into everything around them. And somehow, that was enough to make her feel whole again. And as she sat by his bedside, watching him sleep, Emily couldn't help but wonder, could this message of love and connection heal not only their family, but others as well? Could it bring comfort to people who had lost so much, just like they had? Would Liam's experience, his story, be the thread that helped others find their way through the darkness, just as it had helped her? Life after loss. The weeks following Liam's recovery were a time of quiet adjustment for him and his mother. The days were heavy, marked by the absence of Daniel, but also strangely lighter, touched by Liam's newfound energy and determination. He had not just survived the crash, but how he had come back, carrying something far greater than himself. Liam's experience had changed him, but it wasn't in a way that made him distant or withdrawn. If anything, he seemed more present. He would sit in their small living room, his favorite blanket draped over his legs, and watch the world outside the window with a thoughtful expression. He spoke often of the tapestry he had seen and the sense of interconnectedness it gave him. To Emily, it felt like he was always searching for ways to help people weave their threads into something brighter. It was during a memorial service for the crash victims that Liam first shared his story publicly. The service was held in a community hall filled with grieving families, a room heavy with sadness and unanswered questions. People clutched framed photographs of loved ones and wiped tears from their faces. The names of the victims were read aloud, and every name was followed by a moment of silence. When Liam stood to speak, there was a quiet murmur. At just 6 years old, he was the youngest survivor of the crash. Most people expected a few words of thanks or a childlike expression of sorrow. Instead, Liam spoke about the light he had seen, the warmth and love he felt, and the tapestry that held every thread of life together. He told the grieving families that their loved ones weren't gone. Not really. They were still part of the world, woven into something bigger, something beautiful. His voice was steady, calm, and carried a wisdom that seemed impossible for a boy his age. As he finished, the room remained silent for a moment before the soft sound of applause broke through. Some people cried harder, but their tears seemed different now, less heavy, more hopeful. Emily watched her son with a mix of pride and awe. She had seen him grow stronger every day, but this was something new. He was no longer just her little boy. He was becoming a source of comfort and inspiration for others, even in his youth. At home, Emily continued to draw strength from Liam's words. She still missed Daniel terribly, and there were moments when the pain of his absence felt overwhelming. But when Liam spoke of the tapestry and reminded her that Daniel's love was still with them, she found herself breathing a little easier. The house, though quieter now, didn't feel as empty. Inspired by Liam, Emily began to look for ways to help others. She joined a support group for plane crash survivors and their families, a small but determined community bound by shared loss. At first, she attended only to listen, but soon she found herself sharing her own story and, to her surprise, encouraging others to find hope. It was not long before Emily began volunteering with the group. She helped organize events and spent hours on the phone with new members who needed someone to talk to. The work was exhausting, but it gave her purpose. Liam's resilience and his unwavering message of connection had lit a fire in her, one that pushed her to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Liam's presence in the community grew. He didn't seek attention, but people were drawn to him. Parents who had lost children in the crash would stop him at the grocery store to thank him for his words at the memorial. Neighbors would drop by the house, bringing casseroles and asking how they could help, only to leave feeling like Liam had somehow helped them instead. As Liam grew older, his message evolved, but its heart remained the same. He spoke of compassion, of seeing the threads that connect everyone, and of finding beauty even in the hardest moments. He told anyone who would listen that life's struggles weren't meaningless. They were part of a greater picture. Emily watched with quiet pride as her son became a beacon of hope for others. She marveled at how he carried himself, with a humility that belied the profound impact he was having. She still had her moments of doubt or grief, but they were tempered by the strength she drew from Liam. His survival and his message reminded her daily that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. The community began to see Liam not just as a boy who had survived, but as someone with a unique gift for helping others heal. His words brought comfort to those who had lost loved ones, and his simple acts of kindness, helping a neighbor carry groceries, and listening patiently to someone's story, left an impact far greater than he realized. As the years passed, Liam's purpose grew clearer. He began speaking at local events, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. His words didn't offer easy answers, but they carried a sense of peace that resonated with people. He reminded them that loss was not the end, that love endured, and that life, even in its hardest moments, had meaning. Emily, too, found her own path forward. She continued her work with a support group, using her own experiences to guide others through their grief. She often thought about the tapestry Liam had described, and how her own thread was now woven into the lives of so many others. It gave her a sense of connection she hadn't felt in years. Life after the loss wasn't easy, but it was full of purpose. Liam and Emily together had found a way to honor Daniel's memory while building something new. Their story became one of resilience, love, and the power of seeing the beauty in life's struggles. Could their message inspire others to see the world differently? And would Liam's journey lead him to even greater ways of spreading hope and healing? Liam's journey from death to life is one of resilience, love, and hope. But his message from heaven about life's struggles being part of a greater plan still raises deep, haunting questions. Could we all be part of a tapestry beyond our understanding, and are we ready to embrace its meaning? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories that challenge the boundaries of belief and reality.